Hello, this is Christina Barr, and you're watching Black Tea News. Hello. Welcome to Black Tea News. I'm your host, Christina Barr, and today we're going to be talking about, well, there was a vote the other night and about redefining marriage instead of like the Defense of Marriage Act. It's like the marriage. Well, I have an article about it. I can't think of the name of what it is off the top of my head, but I was really curious. It's bipartisan effort. Now, it's reaction to some of the things that Clarence Thomas has said in his ruling in regard to Roe v. Wade and substitute process and how he feels about Obergefell and cases like that. However, there's not any sort of votes to overturn Obergefell, which is what made marriage legal across the whole United States. There was no signal that any of the other justices would sign on to anything like that. And I don't think they would. The votes aren't there. And they keep comparing it to other stuff like Jerry Nadler compared to interracial marriage, which, I mean, still not the same thing. So I know I wish people kind of stop acting like, I don't know, being a minority is somewhere on the same sort of vein, just because you can face different kind of discriminations is not exactly the same thing. But anyway, there was like 47 Republicans who signed on to it. And I think obviously this is a bit of a political stunt for the Democrats, because they are so bad at everything that they need these wedge issues. And so Republicans signed on to it. But I think for a lot of different reasons, it's not a great idea where they're going with it. And I was thinking about this and a lot of the different things with the gender and even the stuff with the libraries and the drag queens, and a lot of it really makes sense when you read up a lot or even a little bit about Marxism. And I don't want that to be like a buzzword, but there is always like a sort of evil agenda behind the scenes to redefine society so you can destroy society. And I think that's unfortunately where we are and where we're going to continue to go. I have a really good article, I think, from Heritage that I want to share with you guys that goes into BLM and how Patrisse Cullors, she's one of the founders who stepped down because, you know, she bought all those houses and other stuff. And we know BLM is in some hot water because of financial reasons. But BLM, when they talked about having some kind of philosophy, they would say that they're trained Marxists. And they mean that. They were actually trained by trained Marxists. And so Heritage goes through that. But one of the tenets of BLM on their What We're About page was to disrupt the nuclear family. If you read through What We're About page, which I've done on the show before, so I'm not going to go through that all today, they were inclusive for every kind of individual besides a black father or a father, a cisgendered man who was a father. They didn't have any sort of interest in that, but they did have an interest in reshaping our society. And we see that people are angry about parental rights and parents wanting to kind of control the destiny of what their kids learn in school. People really push back against that. And there's all a reason for that. If you're watching, please make sure that you go ahead and that you like, that you leave a comment, say hello, so it gets some more engagement. I don't know if it's like showing up in the notifications, but or if I hit maybe a trigger that Facebook isn't happy with. Maybe it's the Marxism word. But yeah, we're going to go through all that today. We're going to talk about the Republicans' vote and why I see a lot of things going in the wrong direction socially. And I don't believe that everyone who is fighting for what they view as equal rights is some part of like Marx's plot. Just want to get that like throw that right out there. But I do believe, just like people use racial grievances, like with CRT and different things, that is part of the plot. And people use a lot of these cultural wedge issues to really try to destroy a lot of traditional institutions like religion and like the family unit, to try to bring about this big shift that we ultimately end in our nation. And it's happened before. It can not here so much, but other places. And if we're not careful, it will happen again. So we're going to be talking about that. There's another story that I'd like to kind of quickly go through, but I'm not sure if I'm going to have the time. But before we jump into all that, I want to encourage you guys to go blacktnews.com. Make sure that you guys are checking out different articles that we have on the website, different videos that we have on the website. I posted kind of like a side note video of one of taken from one of my lives the other day, talking about Eric July, who's people are so mad at this man for building his own comic book company. It's so funny how these people who consider themselves so woke and inclusive really, really get mad when there's an independent thinker doing his own thing, and they're like, we didn't give you permission to do this. So you guys can check that out. Or just check out the Ripaverse, as I don't really know Eric July. I'd like to have him on my show one day, but I'm proud of him for what he's doing. Make sure you guys check out different merchandise on the website. I love this shirt, like the My Money, My Business shirt, which I made that because I got sick of people telling me that stuff with like abortion wasn't any of my business. I'm like, does it involve my taxpayer dollars though? Like, you guys want to get rid of the Hyde Amendment, which people legit want to get rid of the Hyde Amendment. I think it was Nadler said that the other day, and who was going back and forth? I can't remember what Republican was going back and forth. And they're just like, "Oh, you like are openly admitting that, huh?" So when people say that it's not your business, that's certainly not financially true. Also got, you can get the Black Tea mug. You are not that special. I think that's really relevant today. I'm not the victim you're looking for. And of course, you got the goat hoodies and goat shirts and all that other kind of stuff. And one more, the Be Better Not Bitter shirt. Love that one. So you guys can check out that stuff if you like what I do here at blacktnews.com. Make sure that you guys are liking, that you are subscribing. But if you would like to donate, you can go to blacktnews.com/donate and leave a gift. Whether you can give $10, $20, $50, $100, whatever you can do. I really, really appreciate it. Money doesn't fall from the sky. This doesn't just stream out of nothing. There are costs and stuff associated, and people who have been kind enough to support, I appreciate you. And if you don't have it or don't want to, frankly, I appreciate the view. I appreciate the comments, and I very much appreciate when you guys tag other people and say, hey, check this out, listen to this person. Make sure you guys are leaving your information on the website when you're signing up for different emails. I appreciate all of it, even just typing something in the comments or hitting that like button or love button. All that really does also help with engagement. So I do very much appreciate all of you guys. I also want to thank Bride Mission Pack. I'm in their studio today. If I say something today that triggers you, which could very well be likely, they don't care. I don't care. It does not work like that. They just like to uplift conservative voices, and I appreciate having the space to voice my opinions, especially in a time when so many people are trying to, I guess, really topple everything that we know and love. So kind of bleak a little bit today, but I think it's going to be a really informative day. So thank you for joining me here. So first things first, I do have a comic book like clip from George Alexopoulos. He's one of my favorite go-to people. You guys know that I like to start with something funny. It's not really funny though. He does a lot of comic book stuff with like political commentary, and some of it's like, haha, that's so funny. But a lot of it's just kind of too real to be funny. And so this is like based off of a real incident, and it's kind of graphic. When a person with a female body and a person with a male body have intercourse, the penis slides into the vagina. And they're like, "Sir, you can't read that material like that. That here, parents are present." And they're like, "Take him away." So they take him away, and then that same person later reads to these little children. You see all their mouths dropped. That kind of touching can make the whole body feel sexy and afterwards even sleepy. So this is based off of a real incident. I don't have the clip with me, but there's a father who went to like a meeting and he started reading it, and they're like, "You can't read this here. You can't read this here." And that's not the only time it's happened. And he's like, "This stuff is actually like in the libraries, it's in the schools. So if this isn't appropriate for me to read out loud to everyone here, why do you think that it's appropriate for children to have access to this in schools?" There's some really, 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 really graphic stuff that we've covered throughout the year. um, that's been in different libraries. If you follow libs of TikTok on Twitter, you'll probably never sleep again as a parent, at least until you pull them out of public schools, which you should, in my opinion. So we're just in a really, really dark time. So I just want to jump into this article from the Heritage Foundation because I think it really speaks a lot to what's going on. We can understand why people are kind of doing a lot of these things. And why is it that there's kind of so much perversion in the schools? Why is it that people want to expose children to so much, and then just like, "Guys, this is weird, this is gross," and they're like, "Who are you to say this?" Or I don't know, they act like it's not weird to have a drag queen at a library reading stuff or have these people dancing. Now, I've read before on air about a drag queen's quote about defending like drag time story hour. And they said that it's important for to teach these kids that there's no boundaries. And I'm like, well, can't you just, I don't know, have someone from the STEM field read a book to the children and be like, "I achieved my dream. I help people go to space," or something like that. Or I do the math to help people go to space. Or, that would be like a good thing to show people there are no limits. Like people used to want to be astronauts and other stuff like that. And now it's like the drag queens have to teach kids that there's no limitations. Why not get people who started their own business, or authors who write like good, really wholesome content to be like, "I achieved my dream," and you kids can do the same. I've done school visits, and kids, are inspired, and they like the characters and all the good stuff. I love doing stuff like that. But it is a little weird that people are like, "We need drag queens to teach kids that there's no limitations." It's like, well, limitations on what? Because I keep quoting this quote from RuPaul, which is kind of ironic because but RuPaul said that drag is never meant to be mainstream, and it's ironic because RuPaul did like the drag race and really made it mainstream. Um, but uh, he claims that it won't ever be mainstream because drag is about mocking the culture, society, sex, like everything. It's about making a mockery of it. So I think it's weird that if you want to have kids go to this place where they're kind of supposed to learn structure and all these, and I don't know, all these other sort of things in life, that you would have these drag queens come and they're supposed to be a mockery. To me, it's like a minstrel show of womanhood. That's what it is. I mean, besides the fact that some of these people look like monsters, in my opinion, but they're mocking femininity. They're mocking womanhood when they put on that makeup, the ghastly makeup, and do all the kind of other stuff that they do. So I wouldn't say that's a thing that you would normally, in a normal, healthy society, be like, "Yep, that's who we need to teach the children and inspire the children." But why is there a big push for this? Why are these people protecting it as if they don't know that it's weird? Why do we have a society that's pushing the idea that you can just change your sex and your gender like that's just a normal, and that we can't like talk about it without fear of having accounts blocked and banned and being reported and all kinds of other stuff? It doesn't make a lot of sense why there's so much redefining going on. Um, unless you look a little bit deeper. So this article from the Heritage Foundation is from March of this year. I think it's March of this year. Yep, it was March of this year. Black Lives Matter financial controversies has the organization back in the news and has renewed interest in Marxism in general, particularly its attacks on the family. And with good reason, not only are BLM Global Network Foundation, the mothership of BLM, and Marx at war with the most essential institution in society, so are most Marxists in between. Karl Marx said as much in the Communist Manifesto of 1848, in which he called for the abolition of the family. The family was already absent among the proletariat. Marx and his co-author Friedrich Engels, who wrote, and among the bourgeoisie, the family was a mere money relation. Most importantly, Marx said that communism would ensure that children would be educated by the state and not by their parents. Communist, he wrote in the manifesto, would rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. The making of the new man was the priority, and the family was an obstacle. So already, I think there's some relation you could see like to today with people being so upset with stuff like the rights and education bill, or people parents being like, what are you teaching my kids about all this cultural Marxism racism stuff? Like, no, like I just teach them math and science and normal stuff. Don't try to do all this kind of social deconstruction with my kids. And they're like, how dare you? And they really feel entitled, like they know better than the parents. There was a quote that the Michigan Democrat Party put on their website, their social media on Facebook, basically saying, I don't know where this idea came from, that parents are supposed to decide what these kids learn. The client is a society, not the parents. And it's like, who are the taxpayer dollars coming from, right? Aren't they coming from the parents and the property tax and all that other kind of stuff? Let's look at that first of all. But what? Who is the society? Why are the parents not part of the society? And what is it that you think the society needs children to know, apparently, that the parents wouldn't agree with? This is weird. And they put that on their Facebook, and it was up there not an extraordinarily long time, but long enough that if it was me, and I used to work for the Michigan Republican Party, I probably wouldn't have had a job if I had posted that. And eventually, like, oh well, this doesn't reflect our candidates. Like, I think it reflects quite a bit. I think it reflects quite a bit. So I didn't forget that. But that's the sort of thinking that people have, especially when they got mad at like the Florida bill and other bills across the country, and they try to feign it like, oh, they just want to push racism and they don't want to teach history. Like, I know you guys don't actually want to teach genuine history. Um, you want to teach your deconstructed, reconstructed view of history to fit your sort of narrative, but critical race theory, according to the Detroit superintendent, they're putting that in every category, not just like in social studies. So to the people who are saying it's not in schools, you're wrong, absolutely wrong. Let's go on. As soon as they won their first victory in Russia in 1917, the communists, now in power, put into practice these policies. Alexandria Kolante, the Soviets' first people's commissar for welfare, put it succinctly when she wrote, the old family, narrow and petty, where the parents quarrel and are only interested in their own offspring, is not capable of educating the new person. Soviet schools even encourage students to snitch on their parents. So that aggression toward like parents, believing they're not good enough to truly educate the child and what they need to know, because that's just kind of traditional old way of thinking. We need the new man. So I think you can kind of see like that sounds eerily familiar if you've been paying attention. Not everybody's been paying attention, but if you've been paying attention, you've been watching Black TV for a while, I know you guys have been paying attention. Ingalls particularly was not was at war with what he called the patriarchal family, because he believed wrongly that it had introduced the concept of individual private property, which Marxists hate. We can see in these statements and beliefs the first few battles in a war we have in full flower today over whether parents have a right to have a say over their children's education. But it didn't stop with Marx and Engels. Hungarian communists managed to establish a Hungarian Soviet for a short time in 1919. They quickly realized that the way to completely change society was to destroy the most important civil society institution, the family. Its culture and education commissar, George Lukács, therefore instituted a system to instruct young children into sexual perversions. I'm sorry if I'm like getting their names wrong. Lukács' biographer described it this way: special lectures were organized in schools and literature printed and distributed to instruct children about free love, about the nature of sexual intercourse, about archaic nature of the bourgeoisie family codes, about the outdatedness of monogamy, and the irrelevance of religion, which deprives man of all pleasure. Children urged thus to reject and deride parental authority and the authority of the church and to ignore prospects of morality. That sounds interesting and relevant. That sounds interesting and relevant. None of this. You guys remember when there was an article about, yes, we need kink at pride parades and all this stuff. Like when you just expose kids to all that stuff, um, it it's not normal. And they'll say like, "What's not going to make your kid gay or something like that?" Well, there's some studies and articles even from people who are woke that are like, you know what, this is strange that like a 2/3 of my kids' classroom identifies as LGBTQ. But beyond that, people who get addicted to pornography and other things, they're exposed very, very young to weird stuff. Like we're talking about like 9, 10, 11, like really, really young. As a matter of fact, there was a big argument on Twitter between Matt Walsh and other people, mostly like libertarians, because Matt Walsh is like, okay, these numbers are really strange that all these young people who can't consent because they're minors. And I don't mean just like 16 minors. I mean like you're not quite hitting puberty yet. Or you're beginning puberty minors, and they get exposed to this stuff and they get addicted to this stuff. So his thing was like, well, some of these porn sites, we could at least like strengthen verification for your IDs and stuff to even access this stuff. And people are like, no, that'd be an infringement on our liberties to look at porn. And it was he's like, what about the best interest of the children and all this other kind of stuff? And like, be a better parent. And it's uh you try to be the best parent that you can. Most people I hope try to be the best parents that they can. um but sometimes they're with other friends who unfortunately don't have the best parents, maybe, or they get access to certain things, and then they can be exposed. Parents can't be with their kids 24/7, and people would think that was weird, and then they'd be mad at them anyway if they were. So it was a very interesting argument to watch. That was probably maybe 2, maybe even 3 years ago. Um, but people get very exposed to the stuff very young, and then um, they don't quite have a normal experience from there. And someone that Matt Walsh mentioned in his "What Is a Woman" documentary, Arthur Kinsey, who Hollywood like celebrated and kind of ignored all of the pedophile stuff. Um, they even did a movie with Liam Neeson. I hope Liam Neeson didn't know all the weird stuff. But he hated Christianity. He hated the idea of society being kind of more polite with sexuality and stuff. He wanted to totally destroy that, and he saw Christianity as a real opposition to what they were trying to accomplish as far as like sexual liberation went. And he had the theory, because the idea was just kind of like at a certain age you kind of like sexually awaken. He had the idea that we're always sexual, even children are always sexual. And he would get his data from really weird skewed places like prisoners, um And one guy he got a lot of data from, as far as like for children and orgasms and other stuff, from a pedophile who molested a large sum of children. A large He like worked for the government, I believed, like monitoring land or something. I don't remember specifically, but I guess he'd travel and get to kids and molest them. And he had a chart, and Kinsey actually put that in his book. And he would have people write to him about their weirdest sexual fantasies and the weirdest stuff that they do, and interview people. And they did not believe sort of in monogamy and other stuff. And he was like a suppressed homosexual himself. But there are people who would do heinous things to their kids. I saw a documentary, and there was a young woman who believed that data that Kinsey had was from her, and a chart that her father sent in, data her father sent in. And the Kinsey Institute, they didn't want to help anybody solve any crimes. They're like, we would rather destroy all of our data than give it up to Congress or anything. So these people are pretty sick. But they wanted to sexualize everyone, including children, in order to get rid of this idea of a polite sort of society where we can have like men and women be married and have these relationships where it's just one and one, and they wanted this huge liberation. And I don't really think we've been better off since the big days of the sexual revolution. My opinion, and it's just my opinion. I think it's a pretty legit opinion, but we can go on. Anyway, none of this went down well with a typical Hungarian. Needless to say, the Hungarian Soviet lasted only 133 days. The fight against the family, sometimes using sex, sometimes in other ways, continued for Marxists. Lukács escaped with this life and influenced a group of neo-communist academics in Germany that we know as the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School sounds familiar. A lot of people have talked about it in relation to CRT, and how there's like a bridge from CRT, from like critical race theory to like critical theory, which evolved obviously from Marxism. People who try to deny that it is Marxism aren't being truthful. Three of their most famous scholars were Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and Herbert Marcuse. One of their key intellectual contributions was the idea that it was the family that created the authoritarian character. The patriarchal father created in his children the desire to obey and submit to authority. Marcuse didn't stop there. He immigrated to the United States in the 1930s to escape Hitler, and while here wrote an influential bestseller in 1959, Eros and Civilization, which is seen as a founding document of the sexual revolution in the 1960s. Marcuse was very clear why the revolution was important: to destroy the family. He wrote the body in its entirety would become a thing to be enjoyed, an instrument of pleasure. This change in the value and scope of relationships would lead to the disintegration of the institutions in which the private interpersonal relationships have been organized, particularly the monogamic and patriarchal family. Communists indeed tell us again and again that they are at war with the family because they know it is a handy way to destroy society. Eric Mann, an influential communist in Los Angeles, was candid in an interview in 2015 that whether the issue was race, sex, or climate, the goal is to overthrow the government of the United States. Which brings us to BLM GNF. Eric Mann is influential partly because he recruited Patrisse Cullors, one of the founders of BLM, into his labor community strategy center in Los Angeles at the young age of 17. He then trained her there for 10 years on how to be a Marxist organizer. So when Cullors says of herself and Alicia Garza that they are trained Marxists, that is what she means. So I didn't know that about Patrice. I knew about the trained Marxist thing. I didn't know about her connection to Eric Mann and being trained all that time. So that's really interesting. Um, Now, there's an interview where she mentions that she's a trained Marxist, and she's being asked, like, there's been other sort of uprisings, political uprisings that have said, hey, we're going to go somewhere like, there's the one with the Wall Street thing that they had and other stuff that they're like, they said this was going to go somewhere and then they kind of fizzled out because they didn't really have a clear ideology. And she's like, well, we have an ideology. We are trained Marxists. So when people talk about BLM being like related to Marxism, no, it literally is like that's where they find their ideology. It has that foundation in Marxism, which has been admitted by the people who ran it. And really why I don't appreciate all these people sharing it and uplifting it and using hashtags and giving money and all, etc. I just 2020 was such an annoying time of my life. So it should hardly surprise us that among the 13 guiding principles of BLM, we see a call for disruption of the nuclear family. These ideas are now being taught to our children throughout the United States through the BLM curriculum that goes out to school districts. The BLM GNF has run into difficulties lately. Reports said that it has not yet appointed an executive director since the co-founder Patrice Cullors resigned from the post, that 60 million remains unaccounted for, and that BLM GNF sent its Canada affiliate on whose board it sits, Cullors' wife, millions of dollars for the purchase of the Toronto mansion that served as a headquarters for the Communist Party of Canada. But BLM GNF remains as ideologically committed as it was, as it always has been. It understands too, did Marx, Lukács, and Frankfurt school scholars, that Eric Mann, that communists must destroy the family if they are to take over society. So I don't think, again, I don't think everyone who's just like, I like who I like and love who I love, and I just want to be left alone. There's people who, um, are in different communities, whether they're Black activists and maybe do the BLM hashtag from time to time, who aren't engaged in all of this or don't know us all this deeply or don't have some kind of evil agenda. There's people who are gay who don't have some kind of evil. Plenty of people who don't have any kind of evil agenda. People who are trans who don't have any kind of evil agenda, but there are people who do have evil agendas who want to use all these people, just like people have been using Black people for a long time. You know, it's not really new. I keep talking about this book, Color, Communism, and Common Sense by Manning Johnson, and he was someone who was a communist and ended up defecting. And he talked about how people would use like really real racial grievances, but to recruit different people into communism. And no matter what you wanted for your community, your ideas of uplifting the Black community could never supersede the ideas of communism. So there are people who really want to fight for freedom and all the other kind of stuff and equality, but there are people who genuinely want to redefine the nation, who don't believe there's anything wrong with Marxism and communism and all those sort of other things, and they do have a deep disdain for Christianity and the family and all sorts of other things. There was an interesting article by David French, which I don't always love David French. But he wrote an article called "The God Gap" and how it explains the seismic shift in American politics. And so, what's interesting is that there was all this chatter in the past about the Obama coalition, and how he was going to build up all these different people. And you had the Romney voters who were just like all these white Christians, and they just thought it was just kind of be this fading sort of thing. But fast forward a little bit, and Trump grew the numbers, and it's not just because of Trump. And it continued to grow to grow, and we're seeing different races. Like there was our first congresswoman of Mexican descent is a Republican who won in a district that historically it's like, that is different. It's usually been Democrat. So there is a shift, and French says that the big shift is really about religion and culture, and that a lot of these things that Democrats are pushing is not where people are at. And there's a lot of people who believe in God, who believe in the Bible, who believe in objective sort of views and morality that have impacted culturally how they feel about things and particular issues. And Democrats aren't really just jiving with that. And he had, let me read a little bit of the piece. Um, Here's an example with the Hispanic voters. Hispanic voters are far more likely to believe that America is the greatest country in the world, far less likely to support defunding police, far less likely to believe racism is built into our society, and far less likely to believe that transgender athletes should play on sports teams that match their current gender identity. In most cases, the polling gap is just immense. What accounts for such monumental differences in beliefs and values, as my colleague Jonah Goldberg often and rightly says, we should reject monocausal explanations for complex social phenomenon. But here's a factor that simply isn't discussed enough. The Democratic Party has a huge God gap, and that God gap is driving a wedge between its white and non-white voters. Pew Research survey on American religious beliefs provides us with a picture that's worth 1,000 words. So I do have that ready to go for you guys. So we would be foolish to believe that religious differences this immense would not eventually manifest themselves in different political values. Ever since I first set foot on Harvard Law School's campus more than 30 years ago, I've seen with my own eyes how utterly scornful many powerful white progressives are towards traditional Christianity. And so let's look a little bit of this graph. With belief in God, and it's described in the Bible. White Republicans are 72%, non-white Republicans are 69, and believe in a higher power or spiritual force is at 22%. Don't believe in God is at 5%. When you look at Dems, it's just a really big difference, especially when you get to like white Dems. um, so there is a difference that I think they're correct. And they're going to keep finding problems as far as these different demographics, which is funny because their idea was that demographics are destiny. You bring in all these Hispanic people and, you know, across the border, and when you give them, you know, amnesty and they become citizens, et cetera, they start voting and then you basically wipe out the Republican Party. Well, what if that's not so? What if they're bringing some of their other morals? A lot of these people, you know, might be Catholic and so on, and they have a certain foundation in the things that they believe. Maybe they're escaping bad places, and they're like, you know, I fled here because I think this is a land of opportunity, and I'm not into a lot of crazy things that I think you guys are trying to do to just kind of throw the whole table over. And so I think I don't even think Democrats are kind of waking up to. I think they're still very surprised about this, and I wonder what they think about pieces like this from David French. I'm going to read on a little bit. Yet, in the scorning tradition or orthodox religious beliefs, secular progressives are often scorning dispensable members of their own coalition. Writing in response to the flare ups over Chick-fil-A, a Yale law professor, Stephen Carter, sounded the alarm more than 4 years ago. Overall, people of color are more likely than whites to be Christians, and pretty devout Christians at that. Some 83% of all Black Americans are absolutely certain that God exists. No other group comes close to this figure. Black Christians are far more likely than white Christians, 84% to 64%, to describe religion as very important in their lives. Of all ethnic groups, Black Christians are most likely to attend services, pray frequently, and read the Bible regularly. They are also, here's a kicker, most likely to believe that their faith is the place to look for answers to questions about right and wrong. And they are, by large margins, the most likely to believe that the Bible is literally inherent the word of God. In short, if you find Christian tradition creepy, it's Black people you're talking about. Hispanic Americans also tend to possess strong religious values. In October 2020, the New York Times' Jennifer Medina published a report highlighting the Trump supporting Hispanic evangelicals called Latino Evangelical and Politically Homeless, and featured It featured this insightful sentence: Hispanic evangelicals identify as religious first and foremost. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly why a politics focused on mobilizing by race/ethnicity will not reach them, especially when the identity politics is paired with hard left cultural positions and hostility for traditional religion. Hispanic voters will find a religious connection with many, many white Republicans, and that religious connection can prove far more culturally and politically consequential than any effort to create politics based on ethnic or racial identity. So I think that's obviously making a huge play. Now, with Black people being so religious, what is it with people voting for Democrats like consistently? I've talked about that on the show. I have a video, it's about an hour long, describing why I believe Black people vote Democrat. It's almost religious how they do that. But beyond like Black people, well, I think the main reason is that Black people more than any other group feel that race is part of their identity, and Democrats have really, really, really tried to make it seem like being Black is part of like a, or being a Democrat is part of the Black experience. They call you race traitors and all Uncle Tom's, all sorts of other things. If you are not engaged with that, they get people politically involved in hip hop and other stuff to be like, you're a Democrat and these white Republicans are racist, all the other kind of stuff. So I think if they continue to be so hostile religiously, they'll run into a problem like they're running into a problem with Hispanics. But I brought up this article with David French to point out that Republicans yesterday in the House decided to vote to redefine marriage. Now, Obergefell is not in danger. This is like a reaction to that. Obergefell is not in danger. The only person who mentioned something about the concept of substantive due process is Clarence Thomas, and that would put that ruling in danger. Now, you can support something and acknowledge that some rulings aren't good. Like, I see people very upset about the possibility of Obergefell being overturned. I don't see a lot of people making the case that it shouldn't be overturned on the merits of the case. And that's the same thing with Roe v. Wade. I've seen people very upset that it was overturned and still upset that it's overturned. And there's lawmakers who were protesting the other day saying, who got like arrested for a little bit, right? Which really they're obstructing traffic and were warned like 3 times. They didn't get arrested for fighting for reproductive freedom. They got arrested for like obstructing traffic while they were doing that, or claiming to do that. Just waste of time, nonsense. But they're still upset about Roe v. Wade being overturned, not because it was good legally. They just liked what it accomplished for them. So there's that. And we can have honest conversations like, is Obergefell like a legit case that legally should stand the test of time? And should you, I don't know, codify in other ways? I mean, if it was like stripped, what happened Roe v. Wade would go back to the states, and then different states would have to have different legal rulings and whatever about that topic like they had in the past, which I think it's a little funny that we have gay marriage nationally because the people of California couldn't accept the results of their election, because they had it on the ballot the year Obama got elected, and it got shot down. And I was really surprised. I'm like, it got shot down in California? Probably because all these Black people came out to vote and they saw what's on the ballot. they shot that down. They shot that down. But of course it made its way back up the Supreme Court. So I understand them freaking out a bit, but Clarence Thomas is the only person who has hinted at all of how he feels about that, and the other justices have pretty much hinted that they would not be on board with that line of thinking. We don't have the votes for that. We don't have the votes for that. Now you can say, well, once upon a time we didn't have the votes for Roe v. Wade. Okay, I mean, if one conservative justice is gone, you definitely would not even. You wouldn't have even had the votes for like Roe v. Wade, really, to overturn that. Maybe at best they would have found a way. I don't know. No, I think I don't know what Roberts would have tried to push if like Clarence Thomas or something wasn't there and they didn't have all the votes because he was trying to find like a middle ground. I don't know exactly what he would have did because it still would have seemed silly to strike down the Mississippi law. I don't know, but just like one vote away could like change the landscape to people being in some really sticky situations. And that's another reason why it's kind of annoying with the Republicans that cave with this law. Or it's not a law yet, this bill is in the process. Now it's moving on to the Senate. And the only person I saw said didn't want to vote for it was Marco Rubio. He said it was a waste of time, which it is a waste of time. And you can make that argument, but Democrats don't think it's a waste of time because of what politically can accomplish, I guess, for them. So I don't know how they can maybe not find 10 votes for it, honestly, on the Republican side. Um, so I don't know if they push it through, they can probably get it through to redefine marriage. So I wonder, I understand the Democrats probably did it because everything's terrible right now. And they are really depending on these wedge issues to push division. Like what this could happen in the Republican hellscape where they want to control everyone. They want to control women's bodies and they want to say whether you can marry. And Nadler was like making this big thing about interracial marriage. Like that's in the bill too. Like interracial marriage is already protected. People are like, oh, they're coming for interracial marriage. I'm pretty sure Clarence Thomas doesn't want to come for interracial marriage because he's married to a white woman. It's also not the same. It's not the same. Male and female and people of the same. It's still not the same. I don't care if one's black, one's white. They're still not quite the same. So you don't need to weaponize minorities or whatever to fight for your thing that you want to push. Like let's have stuff kind of stand on their own merits if they can. But that's what they're doing. And if they voted on, they're going to say they voted against interracial marriage. That's what they'll do. That's what they'll do. I mean, they'll still say the gay marriage thing, but they'll be like, they don't want black people and white people together. That's what they'll do. They're gearing up for it because there's no point in including it because it's already like protected. But they probably wanted like, here's this vote. We're going to make this a wedge issue, and the Republicans probably like, I'm sure a lot of them probably don't actually care, and voted along with it. There's 47 of them, and so. But I'm sure, but some people are thinking like, I don't want this to be a thing that I'm hammered for in the press or whatever, and they're thinking about that kind of stuff, and they went ahead and had it through. And so there's bipartisan support there. I don't think you're not going to find enough bipartisan support in the Senate. That's my guess. Now the Republicans were taking a bit of a more libertarian approach in recent years, saying, why is government involved in marriage at all? Because a lot of people see it as a religious sort of institution. Like they say they don't care what is said from the government or whatever. They care about like the religious ceremony and the covenant and all that kind of other stuff. And the original idea of marriage was, you want to, or the incentive, I guess, for the government thinking that it should be involved was to protect this nuclear family that we know that the left apparently hates today. But I don't know, I guess largely we can say that marriage has become a mockery to a lot of people. One of the Republicans that voted for it was like, if gay people want to have bad marriages like I had, sure. and she's been divorced. I don't know how many times she's been divorced, but I'm like, that's just not like, I don't know, the great statement you thought it was. so we can acknowledge that marriage isn't originally sort of how we view it today is probably what the government interest was before. That still doesn't negate why we shouldn't have a more libertarian view of it now, of like, okay, let's just kind of wash our hands of it from a government level. Now, I do believe that consenting grown adults should be able to engage in contracts with each other. But I mean, I guess that's kind of what we had in regard before too, like civil union stuff. I think is what we were referring to them as. I don't know all the details of how protected and stuff legally they were, but we could firmed up that kind of stuff as well. I mean, I do believe people should be able to uh, go visit each other in hospitals and do their taxes together and bank statements and all that other kind of stuff. But my concern is with the redefining of marriage is that you'll get more things like Masterpiece Cake Shop. And if you're not familiar, there was a baker in Colorado, and there was a gay couple who came to them. They're like, "Hey, we would like you to make this cake for our wedding celebration." And he was like, "I'm a Christian, I can't do that." And he ended up in the Supreme Court, and they ruled on it sort of so narrowly that it opened the door for him to get sued again, and he was sued again. And he hasn't been the only person in a situation like that where they've been pushed to have to use a legal team to defend themselves all the way at the Supreme Court level. Now, I don't think that there would probably be as broad rulings nowadays, maybe right now, but again, you just lose one of those conservative votes and stuff, and it's you know, and you'll probably have super narrow opinions like the first one that protected him a bit, but didn't protect him and everyone enough to the point where he could get immediately sued again, and other people continued to get sued. So I think that opens up the door for a lot of different problems. Like, I can respect a contract between two people, but a lot of people do not view marriage. I mean, I'm a Christian. I believe that marriage is supposed to be a covenant between a God made man, God made woman. They come together. You leave your mother and your father, and you join together, and you become one flesh. And th- that's what I believe the marriage is. And a lot of people feel that way. And if these bakers and business people, they don't want to use their artistic expression as they see it as extension of the First Amendment to participate in certain stuff. They don't want to have to go to Supreme Court every single time, and not everyone will be able to have that sort of capacity to go all the way to the top the whole entire time. And I'm sure there'll be different ordinances in California, other places. And then there's also like different hate speech laws. Basically, I think I'm concerned about the different kind of worms this would open up. That's similar to stuff that you'd find like in maybe the Equality Act. So I don't know how much Republicans were thinking about all the possible repercussions of all this stuff. But I do know that if they were concerned about sort of electorally the landscape of all this, I think David French is right that culturally you can build a very big coalition around people who already have a particular set of morals and beliefs. Like, Republicans have an advantage with the God gap. They have an advantage, and it's going to continue growing, and it's going to continue getting more diverse, especially as Democrats continue to go super, 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 super far left. But if Republicans are, I don't know, too afraid to be creamed in the media, like the media was like, "Oh, the don't say gay," like creating a situation like that. If Republicans are, in Michael Knowles' words, be squishy, then people are going to find themselves politically homeless, and they might stick with the devil they know, as opposed to saying, I don't love Republicans, but they're sharing my Christian values. I believe they're going to protect those values in my best interest in those sorts of things. Now, I have plenty of people who follow me, who I follow, who I conversate with, who are from different political sides of the aisle, who are on the LGBT, gay, lesbians, transgender, and a lot of them are libertarian. and it's kind of like, I'll live my life, you live your life. And they even respect, like I see how you feel on these particular issues and your religious values, and it's not like some kind of enormous resentment that you see like on the left. It's really you live your life. So I think there are amazing people out there who just really, 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 really would love the freedom to be who they are and live their lives. But as I said, people use racial grievances with Black people to push Marxism. People are using these the LGBT community to try to tear down the structure of Christianity and the nuclear family and parental rights and all these other things so they can push forward a society that is Marxist. And that's what they've tried before in other places, and it's been a very sort of long game. And I don't think that I'm not saying every Democrat who's pushing this is like in on the game. I'm not saying that. But there's enough. There's enough. So I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. And that's where I think a lot of this stuff is going. And I know people find, I don't know, you say Marxism, they act like it's a boogeyman. It's not. And a lot of these people who are, graduating college and are different lawyers and people going into politics and all sorts of other professional fields have been taught that it's a good thing. And you know what? Socialism, communism, all this stuff, it just hasn't been done correctly. It's amazing how many people are pro all this stuff. Or if you say like, BLM is like a Marxist organization, like, what do you know about Marxism? Like, it's not bad. Like, there's a lot of disdain for our traditional sort of values, and that it's coordinated, guys. I don't know what else to tell you. Very coordinated. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about this more at a later time. Last thing I want to mention, just squeeze this in here really quickly. New York is upset apparently because they have like too many illegal immigrants that are there using up a lot of their resources, going to their different shelters and stuff. And there's people who are busing them in from Arizona and Texas, and they want some kind of federal intervention. And I thought this was funny because actually the DC mayor said something about this maybe about a week ago.
The Washington Post reported last week that homeless shelters in DC were filling up. And groups are getting overwhelmed by these buses that the governors of Texas and Arizona are sending here full of migrants. How significant is this influx? How many people?
Well, this is a very significant issue. We have for sure called on the federal government to work across state lines to prevent people from really being tricked into getting on buses. We think they're largely asylum seekers who are going to final destinations that are not Washington, D.C. I worked with the White House to make sure that FEMA provided a grant to a local organization that is providing services to folks. But I fear that they're being tricked into nationwide bus trips when their final destinations are places all over the United States of America.
So why can't DC be the final destination for these people though? Like, why can't you say, we want you here, we have plenty of space, we have plenty of resources, we have plenty of room, don't go anywhere else, you don't need to seek asylum elsewhere, we in DC of such loving and kindness would like to welcome you. Why is she saying I they're being tricked? Like, well, so why don't you have some more compassion on these people and really make the case that they should stay where you're the mayor? I mean, you're the mayor there. You are the mayor. Shouldn't you be like the greatest mayor in the country, right? So shouldn't you be like, you guys are asylum. There's asylum here, because we're all crazy. No, but seriously, yeah, it's funny how they're clearly annoyed that Arizona and Texas are sending people elsewhere, which there's a lot of folks that get dropped off there by the government, or people flood in just from across the border, and then you're like, you know what? We're going to send them elsewhere. And these people get on the bus. They get on the bus. And in New York, Adams and his people are just like, we're required to help these folks. And if they, need money in other states or whatever, they need to just ask for it instead of like sending them here. And it's like, dude, if you guys are going to be all open arms about like illegal immigration, then you need to just open your arms and embrace them if that's what you want. Why like just be okay with releasing them everywhere else in the interior of the United States? I understand you can't handle it, but that is the whole entire point. Not that people don't want people to immigrate in here legally, but just the mass influx of people, it's too much. It's too much. And then we also don't know all these people who's coming in. And I think that's a problem. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the show today. Make sure you got to go to blacktnews.com, check out different articles that we have, different videos that we have on the website. Please make sure that you check out different merchandise that we have. Like we got the XX Club lifetime membership stuff. If you're from Canada, we still got, those freedom shirts from, we had the truckers. Man, it kind of, Trudeau is just awful. You cannot, there's this TikTok trend. It's like, what's one conspiracy theory that you like 100% believe? I believe that's Castro's son. You'd have to be hard. I don't know what you can do to convince me to not believe that he's not Castro's son. Like, and he looks like him too. And his mother was apparently a trollop, but you guys can check out other different merch on the website as well. Make sure that you're liking, that you're subscribing to all my different social media. I'm on Instagram, on Facebook, I'm on TikTok, I'm on YouTube. All my handles are at Black Tea News, black like the color, tea like the drink. And the only exception is Twitter, and that one's at True Black Tea. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.